was a crisp autumn morning in Ridgewood, the kind where the air smells fresh and leaves crunch underfoot. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the quiet streets of this small town. Most people were just waking up, pouring coffee, packing lunches, or rushing out the door for work. But for 3 schoolgirls, it would be the last ordinary day they ever had. The girls weren't strangers to anyone in Ridgewood. They were well-known faces around town, the type who always waved hello to shopkeepers and laughed loudly with their friends during lunch breaks. These 3 were inseparable. Wherever one went, the others followed. They shared secrets, dreams, and even silly jokes that only made sense to them. That morning, they set off together as usual, chatting excitedly about an upcoming school project and what snacks they hoped to find at the cafeteria. They walked along the familiar route toward their high school, passing rows of houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and the occasional dog barking from behind a fence. At some point, they stopped at the bus stop near the edge of town. It wasn't anything special, just a wooden bench next to a rusted sign, but it marked the halfway point of their journey. This is where things took a turn no one could have predicted. By mid-morning, teachers at the school started noticing something unusual. 3 empty desks sat side by side in one classroom. No one thought much of it at first. Maybe the girls were running late or decided to skip class for fun. But when hours passed without any explanation, concern began to grow. Calls were made to their parents, but none of them knew where their daughters were either. Panic spread quickly through the school halls, then spilled into the streets of Ridgewood. Word traveled fast in such a tight-knit community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined forces to look for the missing girls. Flyers went up almost immediately, plastering every available surface with pictures of smiling faces frozen in time. Search parties scoured parks, woods, and abandoned buildings. Police cars patrolled the area non-stop, their flashing lights breaking the calm of the otherwise peaceful town. As days turned into weeks, the search intensified. Volunteers combed through fields, shouting names into the wind, hoping against hope for a response. Dogs trained to sniff out scents worked tirelessly, their noses close to the ground. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning vast areas from above. Yet despite all these efforts, there was no trace of the girls. Not a single clue surfaced to explain why they had vanished so suddenly. Then came the discovery that sent shockwaves through Ridgewood. Near the bus stop where the girls were last seen, someone found their backpacks lying abandoned on the ground. The bags contained books, notebooks, and half-eaten snacks, things you'd expect students to carry daily. But the most chilling part? There was no sign of struggle nearby. Nothing suggested why they would leave their belongings behind and simply disappear. Theories began swirling like wildfire. Some believed the girls might have run away together, seeking adventure or escaping problems at home. Others whispered darker possibilities, about strangers lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every new piece of information brought both hope and dread. People clung to rumors, desperate for answers, but nothing concrete emerged. For the families of the missing girls, life became a nightmare. Sleepless nights stretched into endless days filled with unanswered questions. Meals grew cold on dining tables because no one felt hungry anymore. Laughter faded from homes, once filled with warmth and joy. Neighbors tried to offer comfort, bringing casseroles and offering prayers, but nothing could fill the void left by the absence of those 3 young lives. And so, Ridgewood waited. Hopes rose and fell with each new lead, only to crash again when nothing came of it. As autumn gave way to winter, the town braced itself for the worst. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling sounds and burying clues beneath its icy layers. Still, people refused to give up entirely. Somewhere out there, they told themselves, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. All they needed was patience and maybe a little luck. But deep down, everyone feared the same thing. What if the girls never came back? The days dragged on, and the once bustling town of Ridgewood began to feel like a shadow of itself. The vibrant energy that used to fill its streets had been replaced by an eerie silence. People walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. as if looking at one another might remind them of the pain they were all trying so hard to push aside. But no matter how much they tried to distract themselves, the absence of the three schoolgirls loomed over everything. The flyers that had once been crisp and colorful now hung faded and torn, battered by wind and rain. Some had fallen to the ground altogether, trampled underfoot by passers-by who couldn't bring themselves to pick them up anymore. The faces on those posters, smiling carefree, seemed almost cruel now, a stark reminder of what had been lost. Every time someone glanced at one of the flyers, it felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just paper, it was hope that had crumbled into despair. Every week, vigils were held in the town square. At first, hundreds showed up, lighting candles and holding hands as they prayed for the safe return of the missing girls. Over time, though, fewer people came. Life had to go on after all. Jobs needed doing, bills needed paying, kids still had to get to school. But even those who stopped attending the vigils couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. Conversations. At grocery stores or coffee shops always seemed to circle back to the same question. Where are they? The media didn't help matters. Reporters from neighboring towns descended on Ridgewood, setting up cameras and microphones outside the homes of the families. They camped out in cars, snapping photos of anyone who dared step outside. Their questions were relentless, invasive, and often insensitive. Do you think they ran away? Could this have been prevented? What's your theory about what happened? The constant barrage left the families feeling exposed, raw, and utterly exhausted. Despite the chaos, the parents refused to give up. They spent hours organizing search parties, making phone calls, and begging anyone who would listen to keep sharing the story. One mother, her voice trembling but determined, stood before a crowd of reporters and pleaded, "If anyone knows anything, if you've seen something, heard something, anything, please come forward. These are our children. We need them back." Her words struck a chord, but they also highlighted the growing fear that perhaps the girls weren't coming home. In the absence of answers, rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered about a mysterious van spotted near the bus stop on the day the girls disappeared. Others talked about strange noises coming from the abandoned factory nearby, a place everyone knew was off-limits, but few actually avoided. There were even wild theories about cults operating in secret, snatching unsuspecting victims in the dead of night. While most dismissed these ideas as far-fetched, they added fuel to the fire of paranoia that consumed the town. School became unbearable for the classmates of the missing girls. Empty desks served as painful reminders of their absence. Teachers struggled to keep lessons moving forward while students sat silently, staring out windows or doodling absent-mindedly in notebooks. Friendships frayed under the strain. Some kids stopped talking altogether, retreating into themselves. Others lashed out, picking fights over nothing just to release some of the pent-up frustration and anger bubbling inside them. Even the adults weren't immune to the toll it took. Parents hugged their own children tighter than ever before, checking locks twice at night and keeping porch lights burning long after bedtime. Neighbors who had once greeted each other warmly now eyed strangers suspiciously, wondering if danger lurked behind every unfamiliar face. Trust, it seemed, had evaporated overnight. As weeks turned into months, the reality began sinking in. Hope started to fade, replaced by a heavy sense of resignation. Detectives worked tirelessly, chasing leads that led nowhere. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses revealed grainy images of the girls walking toward the factory before disappearing from view. But beyond that, there was nothing concrete, no clear evidence, no witnesses, no breakthroughs. Each dead, and felt like another nail in the coffin of optimism. Still, the families clung to whatever shreds of hope remained. They refused to believe the worst, even when everyone else seemed to have accepted it. On quiet evenings, they sat together, flipping through old photo albums and sharing stories about happier times. Laughter occasionally broke through the sadness, but it never lasted long. The void left by the girls' absence was too vast, too overwhelming to ignore. And then there were the dreams. Nearly everyone involved, the families, the friends, the teachers, reported having vivid dreams about the girls. In these dreams, they were alive, smiling, laughing, just as they had always been. Sometimes they appeared standing at the edge of a forest waving goodbye. Other times they called out for help, their voices muffled and distant. When morning came, the dreamers woke with tears streaming down their faces, unsure whether the visions brought comfort or torment. Life in Ridgewood had changed forever. What was once a close-knit community now felt fractured, divided by grief and unanswered questions. Yet amidst the heartbreak, there was also resilience. People continued to show up for one another, offering meals, lending shoulders to cry on, and keeping the memory of the girls alive. Though the future felt uncertain, one thing was clear. Ridgewood would never forget the 3 young lives that had vanished without a trace. For now, all anyone could do was wait and hope that someday, somehow, the truth would finally come to light. Winter had come and gone, leaving behind soggy streets and patches of stubborn snow clinging to shaded corners. Spring was finally creeping into Ridgewood, but it didn't bring the renewal people had hoped for. Instead, the town remained heavy with grief, its spirit weighed down by unanswered questions. Life moved forward in fits and starts, but nothing felt normal anymore. That's why what happened next hit like a thunderclap. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the news broke. Sewer workers, men who spent their days doing thankless jobs beneath the surface of the town, were performing routine maintenance near the outskirts of Ridgewood. They were deep underground, navigating the damp, dimly lit tunnels that twisted like veins under the streets. The air smelled musty, and water dripped steadily from the ceiling, echoing in the cavernous space. It wasn't glamorous work, but someone had to do it. As one of the workers bent down to inspect a blocked pipe, something caught his eye. At first he thought it was just trash, discarded wrappers or old newspapers swept away by rainwater. But as he leaned closer, his stomach dropped. Tangled among the muck and debris were personal items that looked startlingly familiar. A scarf, its colors faded but still recognizable. A notebook with pages torn and stained, yet bearing handwriting that seemed eerily significant. And then there was the bracelet, a simple piece of jewelry, but engraved with initials that sent chills down his spine. The worker froze, staring at the objects scattered across the grimy floor. His mind raced back to the countless flyers he'd seen plastered around town over the past 6 months. He didn't need to see the pictures again to know whose belongings these were. Without saying a word, he called out to his co-workers, his voice trembling. "You've got to see this," he said, pointing at the items. When they saw what he was looking at, silence fell over the group. No one spoke. Everyone knew exactly what this meant. Word traveled fast once the discovery reached the surface. Within hours, detectives arrived on the scene, their faces grim but focused. They descended into the sewer tunnels, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they carefully examined the area. Each item was photographed, bagged, and tagged as evidence. The scarf, the notebook, the bracelet, all of them confirmed what everyone feared. These belonged to the 3 missing schoolgirls. For the families, the news was both a relief and a fresh wave of agony. Relief because they finally had proof that something terrible had happened to their daughters. Agony because it only raised more questions. Why were their belongings here? How did they end up in the sewer system? And most importantly, where were the girls themselves? The answers felt frustratingly out of reach, dangling just beyond their grasp. The discovery reignited the town's obsession with the case. People gathered in hushed groups outside the sewer entrance, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the investigation. Some whispered prayers while others muttered curses under their breath. Reporters swarmed the area, shoving microphones into anyone's face willing to talk. The media frenzy was relentless, but no one cared about privacy or propriety anymore. All that mattered was finding out the truth. Detectives worked tirelessly, retracing their steps and revisiting old leads. The sewer system stretched for miles beneath Ridgewood, branching off in countless directions. Could the girls have ended up down there somehow? Or had someone deliberately dumped their belongings to throw investigators off track? Soil samples taken from the tunnel matched dirt found near the abandoned factory, linking the two locations in ways that made investigators uneasy. Back in town, emotions ran high. Parents hugged their children tighter than ever, terrified of letting them out of sight even for a moment. Neighbors exchanged wary glances, wondering if the person responsible for this horror lived among them. Conversations turned darker, more paranoid. What kind of monster would do this? Became the refrain of every discussion. Sleepless nights returned as imaginations ran wild with worst-case scenarios. But amid the fear and uncertainty there was also anger. Anger at the system for not finding the girls sooner. Anger at whoever had taken them, or worse. And anger at the universe itself for allowing such a tragedy to happen in the first place. Vigils resumed, drawing larger crowds than before. Candles flickered in the wind as people stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their grief and determination to find justice. One mother, her voice shaking but resolute, addressed the crowd during one such vigil. "We won't stop fighting," she said, clutching a photo of her daughter. "Not until we know exactly what happened. Not until we can look at ourselves in the mirror and say we did everything we could." Her words struck a chord, igniting a renewed sense of purpose in the community. Flyers went up again, this time accompanied by posters demanding answers. Petitions circulated, urging law enforcement to dedicate more resources to the case. Meanwhile, the recovered items were analyzed in forensic labs. Traces of soil, fibers, and even faint smudges of blood were examined under microscopes. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility explored. Detectives pored over surveillance footage, once more, searching for anything they might have missed the first time around. Leads that had once seemed insignificant suddenly took on new importance. As the investigation pressed on, tensions simmered just below the surface. Arguments erupted between neighbors who disagreed on how the search should proceed. Others lashed out at the police, accusing them of incompetence or neglect. Tempers flared, but beneath it all was a shared desire for closure. People wanted answers, not just for the sake of the families, but for themselves. Until the mystery was solved, Ridgewood would never feel safe again. And so life in the town continued in a strange limbo. Days passed in a blur of activity, yet nothing truly changed. The discovery of the belongings had provided a glimmer of clarity, but it also opened up a Pandora's box of new fears and uncertainties. For now, all anyone could do was wait, and hope that the next piece of the puzzle would finally reveal the truth. In the meantime, the memory of the three schoolgirls lingered everywhere. Their laughter echoed in empty hallways. Their empty desks served as silent reminders of what had been lost, and their belongings, recovered from the depths of the earth, symbolized a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain: Ridgewood would never be the same again. The discovery of the belongings in the sewer tunnel sent shockwaves through Ridgewood, but it also gave investigators a crucial thread to pull. For months, they had been chasing shadows, leads that fizzled out, theories that crumbled under, scrutiny and dead ends that left them frustrated and empty-handed. But now, with physical evidence tying the missing girls to both the sewer system and the abandoned factory, detectives finally had something tangible to work with. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, though the picture they formed was far from comforting. Detectives began retracing their steps, revisiting old leads with fresh eyes. They combed through surveillance footage again, paying closer attention to the grainy images captured near the bus stop on the day the girls disappeared. In one clip, 3 figures could be seen walking toward the factory, their shapes unmistakable, despite the poor quality of the video. After that, they vanished from view entirely. It wasn't much, but it confirmed what everyone already suspected. The factory was key to unraveling the mystery. The abandoned factory itself became ground zero for the investigation. Once a bustling hub of activity, it now stood as a decaying relic of Ridgewood's industrial past. Its windows were boarded up, its walls covered in graffiti, and its grounds littered with broken glass and rusted machinery. To most people, it was just an eyesore, a place best avoided. But to investigators, it was a potential crime scene. Every inch of the property was scrutinized, every shadow explored, every corner examined for clues. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rooms filled with debris and forgotten equipment. Detectives moved cautiously, aware that the answers they sought might be hidden in plain sight, or buried deep beneath layers of neglect. In the basement, they found something that made their blood run cold, traces of blood on the concrete floor. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a few faint smudges that could have come from anything. But forensic testing revealed something chilling. The blood matched DNA samples taken from one of the missing girls. This discovery sent ripples through the town. For months, people had speculated about what might have happened to the girls, but now there was undeniable proof that something terrible had occurred inside that building. Theories multiplied overnight. Some believed the girls had stumbled into the factory by accident, only to meet with disaster. Others thought they had been lured there deliberately, victims of someone's sinister intentions. Whatever the truth, it was clear that the factory held secrets, and those secrets needed to be uncovered. As detectives dug deeper, they turned their attention to the history of the building. Long before it fell into disrepair, the factory had been used for chemical production. Hazardous waste contamination had forced its closure years earlier, and since then, it had become a magnet for troublemakers and drifters. Police records showed numerous reports of trespassing, vandalism, and even arson linked to the site. One name kept popping up in connection with these incidents: a reclusive handyman who had worked intermittently at the factory before it shut down. The handyman lived on the fringes of society, a man known more for his odd behavior than for any meaningful contributions to the community. He rarely spoke to anyone, preferring to keep to himself in a ramshackle trailer parked on the edge of town. Over the years, he had racked up a string of minor offenses: trespassing, public intoxication, disturbing the peace, but nothing that suggested he was capable of violence. Still, given his ties to the factory, investigators decided he was worth questioning. When detectives arrived at his trailer, they found him sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette and staring off into the distance. He didn't resist when they asked him to come in for questioning, though he seemed nervous, fidgeting constantly and avoiding eye contact. At first, he denied having anything to do with the missing girls, insisting he hadn't been near the factory in months. But as the interrogation wore on, cracks began to show in his story. His alibi didn't hold up, and inconsistencies in his timeline raised red flags. Confronted with the evidence from the factory basement, the handyman grew increasingly agitated. He shifted in his seat, his voice rising as he tried to explain. "Away the bloodstains." "I don't know how that got there," he snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. "I swear I didn't hurt nobody." But the more he talked, the more tangled his web of lies became. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he confessed to being involved in the girl's disappearance. His confession was fragmented and confusing, pieced together over several days of interviews. According to him, he hadn't intended for things to go so wrong. He claimed he had encountered the girls near the bus stop and convinced them to follow him to the factory, promising to show them something interesting. What started as a twisted prank quickly spiraled out of control when the girls resisted. Panicked, he said he tried to scare them into leaving, but events escalated beyond his control. By the time he realized what he had done, it was too late. While his story provided some clarity, it also left many questions unanswered. Was he truly responsible for everything that happened, or was he covering for someone else? Had he acted alone, or were there others involved? And perhaps most importantly, where were the girls now? Despite his confession, he refused to reveal their final resting place, claiming he didn't know or couldn't remember. Investigators pressed him relentlessly, but he clammed up, retreating into silence whenever the topic arose. Back in Ridgewood, news of the breakthrough spread like wildfire. People gathered in cafes and grocery stores, whispering about the handyman's arrest and debating whether justice would ever truly be served. Some felt relief that progress had finally been made. Others remained skeptical, convinced there was still more to the story. Tensions simmered as the town waited anxiously for updates, each new detail reopening old wounds. For the families of the missing girls, the confession brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, they were grateful to finally have some answers. By the other, they were devastated by the knowledge that their worst fears had been confirmed. Sleepless nights returned, haunted by visions of what might have happened inside that dark, decrepit factory. Meals went uneaten, conversations trailed off into silence, and the weight of grief settled even heavier on their shoulders. Vigils resumed, drawing larger crowds than ever before. Candles flickered in the wind as people stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their demand for justice. Flyers bearing the girls' faces went up again, this time accompanied by calls for accountability. Petitions circulated urging law enforcement to leave no stone unturned in their quest for the truth. The town may have been divided on many things, but on this they were unanimous. The person, or persons, responsible needed to pay for what they had done. As the investigation continued, detectives expanded their search beyond the factory, combing nearby areas for any sign of the girls. Search dogs sniffed the ground, their noses close to the dirt as they followed faint scents. Volunteers joined the effort, trudging through fields and woods, calling out names that echoed unanswered in the stillness. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning vast stretches of land for anything unusual. Everyone hoped against hope that the girls might somehow be found alive, though deep down few believed it was possible. In the meantime, life in Ridgewood remained suspended in a state of limbo. Days passed in a blur of activity, yet nothing truly changed. The handyman's confession had provided a glimmer of clarity, but it also opened up a Pandora's box of new fears and uncertainties. For now, all anyone could do was wait and pray that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. And so the town carried on, its spirit battered but not broken. Conversations turned somber, laughter grew rare, and trust between neighbors eroded further. Yet amidst the pain and anger, there was also resilience. People refused to give up, clinging to the belief that justice would eventually prevail. Until then, the memory of the 3 schoolgirls lingered everywhere, in empty classrooms, quiet streets, and the hearts of those who loved them. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain: Ridgewood would never forget. The confession from the handyman sent shockwaves through Ridgewood, but it also left people with more questions than answers. His story was messy and incomplete, raising doubts about whether he was telling the whole truth, or if he was even capable of doing so. Detectives worked tirelessly to piece together what had really happened inside that abandoned factory, knowing that every detail mattered. The families of the missing girls clung to hope, praying that this breakthrough would finally lead them to closure. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Investigators began by retracing the handyman's movements on the day the girls disappeared. They combed through his belongings, searching for anything that might shed light on his actions. In his trailer, they found old photos, scraps of paper with scribbled notes, and a rusty toolbox filled with tools far too worn out to be useful. None of it seemed particularly incriminating at first glance, but detectives weren't willing to overlook anything. Every item was carefully cataloged and examined under a microscope. One discovery stood out: a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were filled with rambling entries, some barely legible, others disturbingly detailed. The handyman wrote about feeling invisible in the world, ignored by everyone except the girls who occasionally passed by his trailer. He described how their laughter made him feel both angry and envious, emotions he couldn't control. There were mentions of teaching them a lesson and showing them what it means to disappear. While none of it directly admitted guilt, the tone of the writing suggested a man teetering on the edge of sanity. As detectives pieced together his mental state, they also revisited the factory. This time, armed with new information from the journal, they focused on specific areas mentioned in his writings. One entry talked about a special room where no one could hear screams. Investigators zeroed in on the basement, which had already yielded traces of blood. A closer inspection revealed something chilling: a trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of broken wooden planks. It led to a narrow crawl space, barely big enough for an adult to squeeze through. Inside, they found remnants of fabric, torn pieces of clothing that matched descriptions of what the girls had been wearing on the day they vanished. The discovery sent chills down everyone's spines. For months, people had wondered if the girls were still alive, clinging to the faintest glimmer of hope. Now it felt like the final nail in the coffin. The handyman's earlier claims that he didn't know what happened to them rang hollow. Confronted with the evidence, he broke down again, sobbing uncontrollably as he admitted to hiding their bodies. But when pressed for details, he grew evasive, mumbling incoherently about making things right. Frustrated, detectives continued pressing him, determined to get the full story. Over several grueling days, they managed to extract fragments of the truth. According to the handyman, after luring the girls into the factory, things spiraled out of control faster than he expected. When they tried to leave, he panicked, grabbing whatever he could find to stop them. What started as a desperate attempt to keep them quiet ended in tragedy. Overwhelmed by guilt and fear, he claimed he didn't know what to do next. So he hid their bodies in the crawl space, hoping against hope that no one would ever find them. Though his confession provided clarity, it did little to ease the pain of the families. Hearing the gruesome details only deepened their anguish. Sleepless nights stretched on, haunted by visions of what their daughters must have endured in those final moments. Meals went untouched, conversations trailed off into silence, and the weight of grief settled heavier than ever before. Friends and neighbors tried to offer comfort, bringing meals and sitting quietly in solidarity, but nothing could fill the void left by the loss of the 3 young lives. In the meantime, the town rallied around the families, desperate to ensure justice was served. Vigils resumed, drawing larger crowds than ever before. People lit candles, held hands, and shared stories about the girls, vowing never to let their memories fade. Flyers bearing their smiling faces went up again, accompanied by calls for accountability. Petitions circulated, urging law enforcement to leave no stone unturned in their quest for the truth. Even those who had once doubted the investigation now demanded answers, united in their outrage over what had happened. The media frenzy reached new heights, with reporters camping outside the courthouse and trailing detectives wherever they went. Cameras flashed nonstop, capturing every grim expression and whispered conversation. Some criticized the constant attention, arguing that it added unnecessary pressure to an already tense situation. Others defended it, saying the spotlight was necessary to keep the case moving forward. Either way, there was no escaping the reality that Ridgewood was at the center of a national tragedy. As preparations for the trial began, tensions simmered just below the surface. Arguments erupted between neighbors who disagreed on how the case should be handled. Some wanted swift punishment for the handyman, while others argued that he might not have acted alone. Could someone else have been involved? Was he covering for a partner in crime? Or had years of isolation driven him to commit unspeakable acts? These questions lingered in the air, fueling paranoia and mistrust throughout the town. For the families, the legal process felt excruciatingly slow. Each court hearing brought fresh waves of emotion: anger, sorrow, frustration, as they listened to lawyers debate technicalities and present evidence. At times, it felt like the humanity of the victims was being overshadowed by procedural jargon. But despite the challenges, they refused to give up. They attended every session, their presence a reminder that this wasn't just another case. It was about 3 young lives cut tragically short. Back in Ridgewood, life carried on in a strange limbo. Days passed in a blur of activity, yet nothing truly changed. Parents hugged their children tighter than ever, checking locks twice at night and keeping porch lights burning long after bedtime. Neighbors exchanged wary glances, wondering if danger lurked behind every unfamiliar face. Conversations turned darker, more paranoid. Trust, once a cornerstone of the community, had eroded almost completely. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was also resilience. People refused to let the tragedy define them entirely. Small acts of kindness began to emerge. A neighbor mowing someone's lawn, a teacher staying late to help struggling students, strangers offering words of encouragement at the grocery store. These moments, though fleeting, reminded everyone that even in the darkest times humanity could shine through. As the trial approached its conclusion, the town braced itself for the verdict. Everyone knew it wouldn't bring the girls back, but it represented a chance for justice, and perhaps a step toward healing. Until then, Ridgewood remained suspended in a state of waiting, holding its breath and hoping for the best. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. The memory of the 3 schoolgirls would live on, not as victims, but as vibrant young women whose lives had touched countless others. And though the scars would never fully heal, the town vowed to honor their legacy by refusing to forget. The day of the verdict arrived, and Ridgewood braced itself for whatever was coming. The courthouse buzzed with tension, a mix of anticipation and dread hanging thick in the air. People lined up hours before the hearing began, some clutching photos of the 3 schoolgirls, others holding hands or leaning on one another for support. Reporters jostled for position outside, their cameras clicking away as families walked solemnly into the building. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Family members, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who felt connected to the case filled every seat. As the judge entered and took his place at the bench, a hush fell over the room. Everyone leaned forward slightly, their eyes fixed on the proceedings. Lawyers stood to make their final arguments, summarizing months of evidence and testimony. The prosecution painted a grim picture of a man driven by anger and instability, whose actions had shattered lives beyond repair. They emphasized not just the crime itself but the ripple effect it had created. A town paralyzed by fear, families torn apart, and futures cruelly stolen. The defense, meanwhile, tried to argue that the handyman's mental state made him incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. They pointed to his history of erratic behavior, suggesting he wasn't fully responsible for what had happened. But these words offered little comfort to those sitting in the gallery. For them, no excuse could justify the pain inflicted on their loved ones or the gaping hole left behind. When the jury finally returned with their decision, the silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the faint rustle of clothing and the occasional sniffle as people held their breath. As the foreman read out the verdict, guilty on all counts, a collective exhale swept through the crowd. Some cried openly, tears streaming down their faces while others sat frozen, absorbing the weight of the moment. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it marked the beginning of a long and difficult journey toward healing. The sentencing came next. The judge spared no words in describing the severity of the crime, calling it a profound betrayal of humanity. He sentenced the handyman to life in prison without parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. It was the outcome everyone had hoped for, yet it brought little solace. For the families, this wasn't about punishment, it was about closure, something they knew might never truly come. In the days following the trial, the town slowly began to process what had happened. Conversations turned quieter, more reflective. Neighbors checked in on each other, sharing stories and memories of the girls. Small acts of kindness became more frequent. A warm meal delivered to someone grieving, a handwritten note left on a doorstep, a hug exchanged between acquaintances who barely spoke before. These moments, though small, carried immense meaning. They reminded everyone that even in the darkest times there was still light to be found. A memorial garden was planted near the high school where the girls should have graduated. Volunteers worked together to clear the land, planting flowers, trees, and shrubs donated by local businesses. A stone plaque was placed at the center, engraved with a simple message: "In loving memory of 3 young lives taken too soon. May your smiles continue to inspire us all." On weekends, families gathered there to sit quietly, reflect, or simply be together. It became a place of peace, a way to honor the girls' memories without letting grief consume them entirely. For the families, moving forward was anything but easy. Sleepless nights persisted, haunted by dreams of happier times and unanswered questions. Meals remained sparse, conversations strained. Yet amid the sorrow, there were glimpses of hope. One mother started writing letters to her daughter, pouring out her thoughts and feelings onto paper as if speaking directly to her. Another family created a scholarship fund in their child's name, helping future students pursue dreams she would never get to chase. These efforts weren't about forgetting. They were about finding ways to keep the girls' spirits alive. Schools across Ridgewood also played a role in keeping their memories vibrant. Teachers encouraged students to share stories about the girls during class discussions, turning sadness into celebration. Art projects, poetry readings, and music performances dedicated to their legacy popped up throughout the year. Even kids who hadn't known the girls personally joined in, inspired by the idea that ordinary people can leave extraordinary marks on the world. But perhaps the most powerful change came within the community itself. Strangers who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly, recognizing the importance of connection after such a devastating loss. Parents formed neighborhood watch groups, determined to look out for one another and prevent anything like this from happening again. Vigils evolved into annual events focused not just on mourning, but on fostering unity and resilience. Slowly, Ridgewood began to rebuild, not erasing the scars but learning how to carry them with grace. Still, reminders of the tragedy lingered everywhere. Empty desks in classrooms, flyers fading on lampposts, laughter missing from familiar corners of the town, all served as quiet echoes of what had been lost. But alongside these reminders came determination. Determination to remember the girls not as victims, but as vibrant individuals full of potential. Determination to grow stronger as a community despite the pain. And determination to ensure that their story wouldn't fade into silence. 6 months after the verdict, Ridgewood held its first official memorial event since the trial. Hundreds of people showed up, spilling out onto the streets surrounding the garden. Candles flickered in the evening breeze, casting a soft glow over the gathering. Speeches were given, songs were sung, and tears flowed freely. But so did laughter, as old stories resurfaced and new memories were made. At the end of the night, balloons were released into the sky carrying messages written by attendees. "We miss you," read one. "You'll always be our stars," said another. Watching them drift upward felt like letting go, even if just a little bit. Life in Ridgewood would never be the same. How could it be? The absence of the 3 schoolgirls was etched deeply into the fabric of the town, shaping everything from daily routines to lifelong perspectives. Yet somehow, amidst the heartbreak, there was growth. People learned to lean on each other to find strength in vulnerability and to cherish the moments they still had. The tragedy had exposed cracks in the foundation of their community, but it had also shown them how to mend those cracks with love, compassion, and unwavering resolve. And so, Ridgewood moved forward, not forgetting, but remembering. Not giving up, but finding ways to keep going. The road ahead remained uncertain, paved with challenges and emotions that couldn't be rushed or ignored. But step by step, hand in hand, the town proved that even the heaviest burdens could be carried when shared. In honoring the lives of the 3 schoolgirls, Ridgewood discovered something remarkable: the power to heal together.